welcome back.
Hello.
This is Bad Marriages in the Bible, and we are your hosts. I'm Sean.
I'm Kate.
And we are back after a little week hiatus. We've been busy here on Long Island at Dandelion Ministries, where we create space for people to come and experience and to know the grace of Jesus Christ in their place of need, and we've been doing that a lot. We've been hosting folks for the past couple weeks, so it's been a busy time.
Yes.
And but now we are back with you and creating space for you in your podcast platform. So we, as you know, and we've said many times, we do this through creative means like this. We host retreats, as I just said, and we also create space with our art. With Kate's a painter and visual artist, and I love music and sometimes call myself a musician, but sometimes don't.
we both wrestle with that title.
Yeah, just because there's long stretches when I'm doing other things where I feel like I'm not creating any music.
And as I speak with other artists, there's this like very accomplished painter that I locally that I hope to paint with and learn from, and even he said, he was like, I want to paint with you, but I haven't painted in like a few months. He's like, I got to paint a few canvases before I have the confidence to paint again with other people. And so it just is one of those things that as you tend it and you give it attention, then your confidence grows and being like, I am an artist. Yes. And then, but if time and circumstances squeeze that time away, and artists are always having to find that time again or carve it out. But so, it's a common experience. So if you find yourself in struggling to take ownership of something that you really love to do, you're in good company.
Yes, it's true, because it's the first thing that goes out the window, frankly, when in this world is our creativity. There's so many demands in life, and the world doesn't. We all want it. We all want to watch creative things and see beautiful works of art and all that stuff. But then when it comes down to it, in terms of people spending time on it, we actually don't value it at all. We're like, that's a waste of time. You should be doing something productive, like building a machine or something or investing money somewhere. I don't know. But we actually would all die without creativity and without art. So anyway, that's just our word of permission for you today. It's good to carve out space for you to create, and we love to make that space. And really, it is all so that you can connect with, as art does so wonderfully, helps you connect with your need for grace and God's love, and to really connect with our pain and the beauty of the Lord.
And we'll be doing some of that ourselves in the next few weeks too.
We will. So that's just on my mind. That's why I started that way. And we're going to move on. So we have been walking through the Bible. We've gotten back into the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. And we're skipping a lot through here because there's not a lot of marital relationships. So maybe that's just our lack of foresight. We're going to miss a lot of the Bible by not talking about other relationships. But we will still see a lot. We have been making our way, and we are up to 2 Kings 4. We did a little bit on Elijah and on Jezebel and Ahab last time, and we are going to return to that story next time. But this time we're taking a little break in the middle, because that's what the books do chronologically, and we're going to look at Elisha, who was Elijah's protege. And his successor.
And they were prophets.
That's an important thing to say.
Yes.
They were prophets.
Who were ministering Elijah. I always get them mixed up.
Yeah, Elijah is first and Elisha is second.
And Elijah ministered in the northern kingdom of Israel during the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, which was the most sort of wicked, self-serving royal duo in the history of Israel. And so God raised up a prophet to minister powerfully, actually, to King Ahab and to the people. And under his watch, God raised up a whole school of prophets. So there was a remnant of people who continued to worship God and did not worship Jezebel's God or Baal. And then Elijah felt really lonely in his job, and God gave him a protege, Elisha. And then also there is a school of prophets now, and so we've seen Elijah get carried up into heaven by a chariot of fire.
Chariots of fire. Yep.
And leaving Elisha, he had asked for, sort of a double portion of Elijah's spirit. And Elisha is now walking in the power of God's spirit as a prophet during a time where Israel was being attacked constantly by the Moabites, which were descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot. And so Israel's at war. They're being tempted by all these foreign gods, and
they're going right along with it. They're not really
right.
They're not resisting it.
And they're like, great, let's do that.
Yeah.
Whatever helps. We'll reach for anything, whatever helps us get through all of this stress. So they're totally unfaithful to God, and God is remaining faithful to them and raising up prophets and calling them back to himself all the time. And that's what Elisha and his school of prophets are doing. And so 2 Kings chapter 4, we come to one of the prophets that was under Elisha, and he ends up dying, leaving his family in a really rough spot.
Yes.
His widow comes to Elisha.
Yeah. And she's very distraught because she has no money. And her husband died and they didn't have anything. And he actually had taken out debt with others, with people, and owed money. And one of the things that happened when that happened, according to the law in Exodus and Leviticus, was that if you couldn't pay your debt, then you, the person who took out the debt, usually the man, and his children would then be required to work it off, essentially. And
as slaves.
Well, and there's some nuance in the law in terms of what you call them, like in Leviticus, it says you won't call them slaves, but they will have to work it off until the year of Jubilee.
But it feels like slavery.
It certainly feels like it, and looks like it, smells like it.
Because the woman is like, help! Oh my gosh, the creditors are coming to take my 2 children, which we find out later are sons, to be his slaves.
Yes, and I think that that's effectively what it was. That's how it worked out. I mean,
yeah.
The law, when you read at least when you read in Leviticus, it's trying to actually make a distinction there on some level, saying, yes, you're going to treat him as your brother still, but he has to work off his debt to you until the year of Jubilee. Then he's forgiven all of his debt, which is every 7 years. And but when it comes down to it, do we ever follow the law correctly? No, we don't. And we usually take it and we turn it into slavery. And it's like what we would do, right? And it actually is also, it sounds harsh except for the fact that it's just justice, This is what the law does. It is concerned with, frankly, right and wrong and doing things, the right way. You take out debt to somebody and you can't pay them back. You then have to work it off. I mean, it's like cold.
Fair economics.
Yeah, it's cold and unbiased.
Yeah.
And that is what this law was. And this woman, though, we see how that impacts an actual person. And we see the impossibility of it for them. Because this is, frankly, I bet you the father, had he lived, would probably willingly have gone and tried to work it off and not put it on his family.
Right.
Right. We don't have that. We see their marriage. We just see the fact that they were married, and we see the economic stress that they were feeling. And how can we not relate to that financial stress?
Let's press pause and speak about marriage and financial stress, Sean.
Yeah, well,
it's stressful.
It's stressful. I think it's one of the, when we do any kind of premarital counseling or marital counseling with couples and things, which we have done many times over the years, being pastors. It's one of the big ones, when you have to talk through things. You talk about family of origin, so like the families you've got and the baggage you're bringing into your marriage. We talk about kids, and we talk about finances,
Yes.
and sex, obviously attached to kids.
Mm-hmm.
But finances is always one of the top 3, if not the biggest problem that couples end up facing often.
Mm-hmm.
And it can...
What kind of loans you're bringing in? Are you honest about those? What's
Right.
your spending patterns like? Are you in agreement about those things?
Yeah. What are your expectations?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Are you a saver? Are you a spender? Things like that. And those things can be very stressful. And they can put so much stress on a relationship that it really takes over.
They can all be addressed and found, solutions that satisfy both of you, but it just does need to be all brought out into the light so you can see everything and, honestly talk about who's gifted in what way. Some depends on which spouse is more gifted financially than the other. And, how you're going to manage the roles and just communication about that, what your goals are. It can all be helped, but
Sure.
It does need to have everything brought out into the light and some honest conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, it certainly can. And then there are life circumstances where, sometimes you just are both in survival mode. You're just trying to get through, and you're trying to take care of your kids. I mean, it makes me think of one of my favorite movies, Cinderella Man, with Russell Crowe and Renee Zellweger. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's fantastic. Don't go see it. You have to find it on streaming services or something. But such a great movie, and it's a Depression era movie, and it shows how quickly things can happen and that are out of your control. Like, that's one of the things about finances too. It's one of those areas that you can feel really helpless over because you can do a lot of planning and you can do a lot of work and you can be on it at the same page, and then something can happen that you didn't expect, and you're like, oh my gosh, and it just puts the stress on you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like this at this day and age, in our country anyway, a medical emergency, something like that you didn't expect.
Yeah.
With so much of our health insurance now too, like it's really truly like for like a serious emergency, our health insurance, because our deductibles are ridiculous, and it can just drain your coffers very quickly. And
or we're in our middle age season of life.
Yes.
And we've known not a few couples where the primary breadwinner loses their job.
Lost a job, yeah.
And I remember one testimony, they were like, we have not relied on God or not turned to prayer like that in our lives before. And they ended up being so grateful, and it simplified their life and simplified everything. And brought them together actually as a family, which is what you want.
Yes, that's the best result.
Sometimes there's panic on both sides and you turn against each other. And that's when you need a third party to help you reconcile, see a way through. And so, I would say too, the more you have, those stressors don't go away. The more you're juggling, the more you're thinking about it. It's not that more is the answer.
Right. Well, that's what we always think, right?
Yeah.
But we just go into more debt. That's what Americans love to do. And we are all, so many of us, overextended. And, and so like this is a real thing in Scripture here we're seeing, and the Lord obviously does care about finances. And what we see with the law here is that it's just like, hey, yeah, you didn't do it. You got to pay it back. This is how you do it.
This is being fair to the creditor.
Right.
And the creditor is very much within his rights to do this. So then you see you're building towards this, and I'm going to steal your thunder, but you're building towards the mercy of God, which is what this is about.
I love it when you steal my thunder.
That the law is just, and that is good, and we need it to run our society and to curb evil so that it doesn't get as bad as it could get.
Yeah, if nobody ever paid back their loans, no one would ever loan anybody anything.
Yeah, there would just be no anarchy, and what's the point?
Yeah.
So
there is it does restrain our sin. That's one of the, when we talk about the law, I think we've said this before, but there are two primary uses for the law. I'll just give this little aside here. And what Kate's describing is the civil use. The civil use of the law is the one that does restrain sin. It keeps us from being as evil as we possibly could be. We all have the capability of being Hitler or Jeffrey Dahmer or anything like that. And when we read the law according to Matthew 5 and 6, when we read Jesus tell the law, we see that on a heart level, we all are that. There's no distinction between us. We are all as equally bad. Romans 3 sums it up, that there is no one who does good, no one seeks after God. He's quoting the Psalms, Paul is. And so that use of the law, what some might call the first use or the civil use, is one that restrains our sin. So it's like, if you kill somebody, you're going to jail. That's a deterrent to stop you from doing it, or if there's a busy street and you run out without looking both ways, you're going to get hit by a car. Civil use. And then the second, what others might, and this is where it gets confusing, others might call it the proper use or the primary use of the law, even though we've already said there's a first use and it's the civil use. It doesn't matter. Forget the categories of those.
Two jobs.
The other main use of the law is that it convicts us of our sin. It shows us ourselves, and it shows us our desperate need for a savior. And so that's what the law does. And when we're looking at this, we see the civil use here benefits the creditor, as Kate's saying, but then you look at this poor woman who she probably was in on, agreeing on taking out the loans because it sounds like they just didn't have much. But then her husband dies, it seems like unexpectedly. And now she's in a spot and she is terrified that her kids are going to be taken away. Yeah. And according to the law, the guy's right in asking for that. And so we see the complications that come up and how devastating that can be for a single mom. And like you're saying, we need that. That is what the law is doing right here. It is actually showing her desperate need, which she's very aware of. And so it's driving her somewhere.
And, you see, she's like, my husband was a God-fearing man. He was one of your prophets, training under you. And we still have problems, we still have problems. We were in debt. We had to pull out loans.
Right.
And now we can't pay them back. So, for fast forward to the New Testament or God's people in the Old Testament, that we deal, just because you're God's child doesn't mean you don't struggle with sin and with problems. And so we see God intervening here to have mercy for both, for the mother and her sons, as well as something fair for the creditor.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what Elisha, she goes and asks Elisha, this is the law doing its work, driving her to an outside solution, not herself. Her best, it's what we talk about all the time, our addictive behaviors, our coping mechanisms, all of that. That's our best thinking. This is how we deal with stress, which is like, I know what I'll do. I'll just start taking drugs or I'll just drink, even though I can't afford to buy the alcohol. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, I need something to take the edge off, kind of thing. And it drives us into a bad spot. When we turn to ourselves for the solution. But what happens here is she goes to Elisha.
Yeah, that's faith talking.
Right.
So when faith is talking in you, it's going to drive you to the Lord and be like, help. Oh my gosh, I can't do this.
That's right. And just another little aside, all that addiction is actually part of the driving too, when it comes down to it. Sometimes, many times in my life, I think that I can figure it out to the point where I need something more drastic, where the Lord actually lets me go to a place that's more desperate, so that I'm like, okay. And I despair of my own effort.
Yes.
And I then say, all right, I need your help, Jesus.
And that's actually a miracle. That's actually a good thing.
It is. And so it's one of our mentors used to say, I pray for my kids' lows to be high, the rock bottoms, because that's what they say in the 12-step world is, you got to hit rock bottom first before you actually want to get help. And so he would always pray for his kids' lows to be high. So
Mm.
they didn't have to go too low. So that's a
Mhm.
little prayer for you out there if you have kids.
And, yes, this can speak about heroin, but it also can speak about resentment or
Sure.
fear or anxiety. You name whatever sin, we are sin addicts, and we need God's intervening grace, just like what this story is talking about. This is his proper work. This is what he loves to do. He has designed this situation for us to see that, these were his people who got in trouble, and he enters in to bring mercy and grace.
Yes. And so Elisha says, what do you want me to do for you? And she tells him the whole situation. And he says, what do you have in your house? And she has one bottle of oil.
One.
That's all she's got. We have so many bottles of olive oil in our house. It's ridiculous when you think about this. I'm just like, wait a second. One bottle of oil, that's it? But so she has one bottle of oil. And he says, he tells her then to go get as many vessels, borrow them from your friends, whatever you got in the house, like whatever it is. You get as many containers as you possibly can. And then he says to go in and shut the door behind yourself and your sons and pour into all these vessels. So take that one bottle of oil and start pouring into these others. And when it's full, set it aside and just keep going. And that's what she did. She starts pouring it in, and she fills as many vessels as she had.
And what her neighbors had too. They went and borrowed everybody's vessels.
All the ones she could get were full of oil, and the oil, the original jar, was also still full. And
also, a commentator I read, Elisha wasn't there. Elisha. See, can't ever get that straight. He wasn't there. He gave the instruction, but this is all faith doing this. This is what God's Spirit in you will help you go by faith, not by sight. And so she's doing all this stuff even without him there, and it works.
And it does work. And he says when she comes back and tells him she doesn't have any more left, she comes back and tells Elisha, and he says, go sell the oil and pay your debts, and your sons can live on the rest, you and your sons.
It's amazing.
So it's just an incredible story of, it is foreshadowing. All of these are foreshadowing to Christ. I mean, this is the thing. That's why we talked about the law for so long here, because this is what it does. Even on these weird financial levels that seem to have nothing overly spiritual going on.
But they're earthy, and they're something everybody can relate to, the financial troubles. And God enters into our earthy, everyday, problems.
It's the most in-your-face thing when you can't feed your kids, or in this case, when your kids are at risk of becoming slaves. I mean, most often we don't feel that kind of pressure in the United States, except for we do feel it often with food or provision, with healthcare, things like that for our kids that we can't afford. And so finances are one of those crucibles for us and faith when it comes down to what God is doing with us. It's often a place where God is very much at work in our lives.
And he will, if that's something that you relate to. There are so many stories like this, and it's even in the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. These everyday matters matter to him. And in the very real need for justice, God loves to show mercy, which brings us to what you're about to say.
It does. It's as I said before, this story foreshadows how God handles us when he shows us our brokenness and our deep need in situations that are way too big for us.
That we're all debtors.
Yeah, namely our sin. And that's what, when you look at a bunch of cross references to that law, when we're, looking at the law about if you're in debt, you have to work it off till the year of Jubilee. There's a bunch
until you've paid the last penny.
Until you've paid it all. Isaiah 50, I think, is where it talks about that. It's actually we're indebted in our transgressions, and it's showing us that this is not actually. Our financial issues are all, an echo of our bigger issue that we actually cannot pay the debt, and we actually are in a desperate spot, and we're actually in a place of slavery when it comes to our sin. It's Isaiah 50 verse 1, and it says, "Behold, for your iniquities you were sold, and for your transgressions your mother was sent away. That this is Isaiah, through his prophecies, picking up on this reality that the law is showing us our desperation and the fact that it is too big for us to pay. And that this story that God moves through Elisha, that he overwhelmingly provides for this woman. He pays off her debt, and then he gives her life, gives her new life to live. She was a widower. She had no one to depend on. Her kids were too young, probably, to take care of her at that point. So she needed somebody to come and take care of her. And that's what we see, that this is how God answers our prayers. This is how he actually comes in his son, Jesus. He doesn't just take our debt. He does take all of our debt away on the cross. He saves us from our sin, but then he gives us new life. He fills our jars with oil. It's like all of the feeding of the 5,000s in the stories where he doesn't just feed them and satisfy them in the immediate. He does, but then there are 12 basketfuls left over. This is the way God works. He actually always surprises us with more. He fills our need, meets our need, and then he gives us more. He gives us actual life in his Spirit.
And he might be doing that by giving you some honest conversations with your spouse over finances as a result of this.
And he does that. That's the other thing. It's we know that he takes care of us in the temporal. That's what we see in these stories.
In the nitty gritty, when you have to be honest.
Yep. He's meeting our needs in the real world now, as Jesus says himself in Matthew 6. He's so very clear about the birds of the air and the flowers of the field and all that. He's saying your Father in heaven knows you need these things. So just pray to him and trust the fact that he's going to provide. And he's going to take care of you through this in the temporal. And it's going to testify to what he has done for you in the eternal as well, on the spiritual side of things. So thank God for that. I need that reassurance every day because life doesn't get cheaper. It gets more and more expensive. So especially when your kids get older. So anyway, we just want to thank you guys for listening today. We hope this has been an encouragement for you. As always, you can find in the show notes, you can find our link to our website. You can find a link to support the show. Everything we do is made possible by charitable donations from people like you. So we'd love for that. Love for you to support us. Also, you can give us a review. We would love that. If you, whatever platform you're listening on, if it has a review option, please review the show and tell people how great it is. And there's also my email in the show notes in case you need some extra support or you have questions you'd like us to answer on air. You can send me an email. So we hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.